You're listening to Parallax from Radcliffe Cardiology in association with makeadent.org. Here is your host, Ankur Kalra, MD.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Parallax. Thank you for listening to us through these years. This is season 6. This is another Monday with a new episode. And I have with me the honor, the privilege, and the pleasure of having Shelley Wood on the show again. Now, Shelley has been a guest with us at Parallax before, and she's gracious enough to come back on the show and talk to us about her new endeavor, her soon-to-be-released book, which is titled The Leap Year Gene of Kit McKinley. I'm sure we're going to talk more about her new title that's coming up. She's going to give us all the information about how to pre-order it. Before that, I'm sure she needs an introduction, at least to the cardiology audience. She's the editor-in-chief of TCTMD.com. She's a very familiar face and a very familiar voice, hosting her own podcast as well, for us cardiologists globally. And, she's done phenomenal work in covering our meetings, our research, and really distilling, for lack of a better word, tough topics, complex topics for the clinician at the bedside and the researchers too. So with that introduction, Shelley, welcome on the show. And thank you so much for being here with us one more time.
Thank you so much, Ankur. That's an incredibly generous introduction. I'm blushing a little bit, but it's a real pleasure to be on this show a second time. Thank you.
Great. So, Shelley, well, first of all, congratulations are in order. Your second book is soon to be released. Congratulations for finishing it. You actually have a physical copy in your hand. I know how it feels. I've published one fiction work. It's a book of poetry, and I'm working on my second one. And I know you're a published author as well. You've published a book before, and this one is The Leap Year Gene of Kit McKinley. So tell us more about this title and tell us how the listenership can get a copy when it's released.
Sure. So as you mentioned, this is my second novel. My first novel came out in 2019, and I actually wrote that one, or at least wrote the first draft of that one. There were many drafts. But as you may recall, I was the managing editor at theheart.org for many, many years, and actually quit my job there in order to try to write a first novel, which I did. And after a bit of a battle, it did get published. And that was The Quintland Sisters, which was published by William Morrow. And after that came out, people were teasing me because they said, you're a medical writer, and yet there's almost no medicine in your first novel. There is a doctor in The Quintland Sisters. For people that know the true life story of the Dion quintuplets, they were the first identical quintuplets to be born alive. And they were delivered, or at least some of them were, by a quite bumbling doctor who I think just was an accidental celebrity in this scenario. So not that I'm plugging the first book here, but that first book really did not have a ton of medicine in it, except for a doctor who perhaps was not an example of the kind. So for my second novel, I had, by then already, I was working at the Cardiovascular Research Foundation in my current job. And I knew if I was to write a second novel, I would have to be really careful with my time in order to do that around a quite demanding full-time job. But I also knew I really wanted to take advantage of all the years I've spent researching, not doing medical research per se, but rather researching my stories and researching the topics that we cover journalistically. So from the get-go, I knew that this would have medicine in it. It would feature topics that would allow me to use that skill set of sort of learning more about a specific topic. And in this case, it was with a backbone of genetics, which I can tell you I know absolutely nothing about. And so really had to dive deep into the research of understanding the history of our understanding of genetics, and what that led me to, and is more the sort of soul of the novel, is the history of eugenics and humanity's rather dark fascination with perfecting the human species. And that's at the heart of the leap year gene of Kit McKinley. And actually, it has a different title in Canada, which, as you know, is where I'm based. In Canada, the book is being published simply as the leap year gene.
Well, excellent. Congratulations. And, I think I actually wanted to thank you for plugging your first book. I think authors have legacy building with, subsequent titles that they release. And so more often than not, people read the second title and then want to go back to the first title. So I'm glad you mentioned it. You brought up some interesting, points there, which I want to, sort of explore or uncover a bit more, because I thought there was a lot to unpack there. And, I mean, all of us are very familiar with the quality of work that you put out as the now editor-in-chief of TCTMD.com. The stories you pick, the coverage for all the conferences globally that your team does, and an impeccable job. It's almost sort of investigative journalism, for lack of a better word. And you mentioned that you garnered skill set, which then helped you into writing this fiction title. And I wanted to uncover that, not only for the listenership, but also as someone who's working on his fiction piece. What were those components of the skill set that you thought were very handy for you when you were putting this second title together?
Yeah, I would answer that in multiple ways. So the one thing I wanted to do is, I read a ton of fiction myself, and it's always really clear to me when a writer has done a lot of research. And I don't know much about genetics, as I said, but I also think of other topics, novels that are written by historians, or novels that are written by biologists, or novels that are written by people who really have a deep understanding in antiques. I don't know what it is. So in my case, what I mean is I have spent decades now reading medical research articles, not doing that research, as I say, but at least I know how to read them. I know how to search for them. These sound like basic skills, but honestly, I don't think any of my non-medical friends know what PubMed is or how you go about finding articles on a certain topic. So that's what I mean when I say I wanted to use that skill set. But the other thing that really became clear to me is, first of all, I think I went into journalism because I love writing. So I didn't think I could make it as a novelist way back when, perhaps. And so I turned to journalism, and I've loved my career. I continue to love it now. But the one thing I think it helped me with, two things really. One is it helped me work the writing muscle every day. And now I would say the editing muscle as well, because that's probably the most of what I do is I edit other people's words. So journalism has kept my writing muscles very strong. But it has also really woken in me that sense of a good story. I might be at a meeting, as you say, and it might not be the late breakers. It might be some small session on topic X. And someone makes a throwaway comment, and a little, pitter patter of my heart says, oh, that is a story. And I think I brought that same instinct, that same kind of honed specialty to what happened with both novels. The Dion quintuplets is a story that I really think was being lost to history. And when I first heard of it, I was just astonished that this had happened in Canada. And that propelled me to then write a novel about it. This time around, as I got deeper into the notion of my main character has this fictional genetic defect that causes her to age 1 year for every 4. And we can talk about that and the themes that let me explore. But as that inspired in me this desire to know more about genetics and eugenics, the history of eugenics, I just think is so fascinating. And repeatedly, as I delved into that topic, I had that moment of thinking, what? People don't know that about the suffragettes, for example, or people don't realize that about the eugenics policies of Nazi Germany. There were just so many moments where that quite journalistic aha moment hit me, and I could repurpose that for my fiction. So those are the ways in which I think not only the research skills, but also the kind of instinct sort of behavior that goes hand in hand with good journalism. Those are the things that I was really able to bring to this fiction writing process and this particular novel.
Thank you for sort of unpacking that for us and, for the listenership. So Shelley, eugenics, you bring that word, and I will admit to you as well as to the audience that I don't think I know what eugenics is. Do you mind explaining that to me and to the audience?
Yeah, don't worry. I didn't either. And as I say, I had the idea. I dreamt up the notion of a little baby born that ages much, much slower than the rest of the world. And so I decided that was a genetic condition. And I tumbled down the hill of researching the genetics of aging. But along the way, I sort of crossed paths with the notion of the early genetic researchers who decided to use what they were doing to help perfect our gene pool. So the earliest and best known probably example of this was Galton, who published these works hoping that if you could perhaps marry well, breed well as humans, we could gradually weed out traits that he and others deemed as undesirable. Well, as you can imagine, they weren't so focused on hair color, perchance, as they were other things that they deemed undesirable in the human species. So taken to extreme levels as it does. Well, maybe I better not give away what's happening in the novel, but really it was a pseudoscience followed by many, many people who believed that if you allowed certain people to breed and not others, ultimately the human species would improve. And over time, I mean, some of our most cherished historical figures, Winston Churchill, Virginia Woolf, to mention a writer, they all had quite strong views about who should be allowed to procreate and who shouldn't. And it's really quite disturbing. For me, the aha moment came around the suffragette movement in Canada as well as in the US, where women that are very championed, I think, in our culture today, and indeed in Canada, one of them was going to be put on one of our dollar bills. What I didn't know about them is that they were also huge champions of eugenics, including the sterilization of unfit mothers, and even going so far as to get legislation on the books in several Canadian provinces that went ahead and actually sterilized women to prevent them from passing on their genes. So that's the kind of dark themes that dominate my book, and they center around the notion of this little girl who has a very invisible quote unquote defect, something that stops her from aging alongside her peers. And so it allowed me to explore the notion of, well, what is a defect versus what is a desirable trait? I mean, if you look at superheroes, you might think that not aging is something that many people would like. But as my book tries to make clear, if you are an individual who doesn't age at the same pace as everyone you love, you will ultimately lose all the people you love. And that's at the core of my book as well. Eugenics really gained, just was gaining in popularity for many, many years until the Nazis took it to the quite horrific peak. And after that, as you can imagine, scientists and politicians and the rest of the world were quickly trying to distance themselves from the movement. However, just to add one more thing, because my book does come up to present day, the other thing I sort of wanted this book to do was look at the ways in which we are still involved in eugenics today. If you are going to, get IVF, for example, you can select out the genetic traits or potentially the diseases that you don't want to be passed to your offspring. And then, of course, we have modern day CRISPR. And I hope you're not going to ask me tons of questions about CRISPR. But the reality is that a huge advance in science has been the ability to snip out undesirable genes and have those be treatments for incurable diseases. But that is still eugenics. That is still humans attempting to perfect who we are.
Yes, I think, thank you for explaining what eugenics is and the eugenics movement. I wasn't aware of the history, so, I'm sure you've delved into it in greater depths in the book, and which I think is a good segue for me to ask you, what would be the genre for the book for the listenership who want to pick a copy and read it? What should they be expecting?
Well, it's interesting because my agent actually had a very difficult time selling this novel. My first we thought it would be a shoo-in based on the success of my first, but it actually was turned away by multiple publishers before eventually finding a home. And one of the problems, and one of the prospective editors said this, he said, I don't know what part of the bookstore to put this in, because at some level it is speculative. It's science fiction to some extent. This is a fictional genetic condition. However, my character and her family, they really do need to keep on the run. They need to keep people from discovering what's different about Kit McKinley. And so from that perspective, it's more of a medical thriller. People are trying to understand why she is the way she is. I also tried to write this lyrically. So I would say, I hope it meets the bar for literary fiction, and that people will be charmed by the language in the book as much as they are the storyline. And then I think it also broaches, as I alluded to earlier, bigger feelings and bigger thoughts around the human experience and how we choose to let ourselves fall in love, and what that means when it's time to have to say farewell. So I don't know how we're going to package this book, Ankur. Like, I'm hoping it will just be at the front of the bookstore on a table and people will be drawn to the attractive cover. But it is a bit of a combination of historical fiction, medical thriller, science fiction. It is a little bit hard to slap a genre on it.
Yeah, it sort of is your quintessential indie film industry movie, which has love and thrill and action and comedy and science and all packaged into one. I think I'm working on my fiction thinking that would be a movie. And I know this is very ambitious of me to think like that, but I think that's how each author aspires to sort of write. When you're writing, you're sort of envisioning, you have these visions, you're creating a world. And that's how I think when I'm writing, that, this would be a movie someday. But no, thank you for explaining the genre to us. So, the protagonist in the novel is someone who's aging just 1 year every 4 years. Did I get that right?
That's right. And sort of by coincidence, or perhaps not, she's born on the leap year in 1916. It really does require a leap of imagination, but I'm hoping that I think the expression is a plausible suspension of belief. And once you buy into the notion that this little girl ages so slowly, then you can see how the world evolves at a different pace around her. But the few people the book is told in 4 parts. It's told initially from the perspective of her father, then her mother, then her sister, who becomes a de facto parent to her, given the sort of different trajectories they're on. And yeah, I'm really interested to see how this lands with people. They say you're never supposed to read your Goodreads reviews. And so I'll make sure my husband takes away my Goodreads password. But I am curious to see how people respond to what I'm sort of asking of them imaginatively.
Shelley, when you were putting this together, did you juxtapose it to some of the key historical events that transpired between 1916 and 2024?
Absolutely. I really find with my writing, and I wonder, perhaps I need to challenge myself to try to write a contemporary novel next. But for me, the sort of large events of our time become the signposts that I can write towards when I'm working on a book. I knew I wanted Kit's story to cover a full century. And that gave me the sort of directions I needed to understand what were the major historical events that are shaping the world at that time. And then because that's just too vast of a topic, that's why I ended up cinching it down to really look at the way the eugenics movement was shaping the world, and then use that as the lens through which I could walk my characters through this century. But I would... Yeah, I'm already anticipating people telling me about some massive, important historical event that I missed. And to them, I will say that this book was originally twice the length it is now. So quite a lot of it ended up in the recycling bin, unfortunately. But maybe, Ankur, when the movie gets made, they will want that redacted material. So let's just keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, I think that would be the aspiration. So, Shelley, some, I think, housekeeping points that I want to learn from you, as well as share, have the opportunity to share this with the listenership and the audience. for those of us who are aspiring authors or are authoring, fiction or nonfiction, authoring a book outside of our lives as professionals, in what we do, how do you discipline yourself into putting pen to paper, I don't know, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? And this is sort of a question I ask all the cardiology or physician authors, or authors who have alternate. I mean, being an author is an alternate job. I think that we have full-time careers, as you know. How do you discipline yourself putting pen to paper to sort of get this work done? Because it requires discipline and commitment, and more than motivation, which may die down. I think discipline is something which keeps you going, at least in my own experience. But I wanted to hear from you.
I love this question. And had you not asked me this, I was going to ask you. So I hope you answer your own question after I have a go here. As you may know, on the Heart Sounds podcast that I host for TCTMD, about 2 or 3 times a year, I bring on somebody, a cardiologist usually, who's also working professionally in the arts. And I put this question to them because to make time for creativity is so hard in your day-to-day life if you work in a demanding job. And I'm not going to compare what I do to what you do for a living, but I do know that if I'm giving my job 100% of my commitment and passion, then eking out a bit more of that for writing is extremely hard. So yes, I want advice from you here too. But in my case, what I have to do for my writing is do it first thing in the morning. And I think for that, it just means I absolutely cannot pick up my phone. I won't look at my email. I will shut myself away in the office, barely presentable to the world. I could definitely not do a Zoom call. And I try to get a word count down on page, or if I'm in an editing mode, I will dedicate a certain amount of time before I'm allowed to interact with anyone or anything else. And I think it's different for everyone, but for me, and especially difficult because I live on the West Coast but work on Eastern time, I was really getting up early in order to get in 90 minutes of work on this project. I also find, and it's interesting because I once interviewed Eric Topol about one of his books, and he said this to me, and it was such a relief to hear someone else say this, but he said that at a certain point in every writing project, he needs to go away somewhere on his own, away from his loved ones and away from his other commitments, and only work on the book, the manuscript, whatever part of it he's working on at the time, for some short amount of time to focus on it. And I've found that the same. I have, I think maybe on 3 or 4 different occasions with this book, had to leave my family and friends and go to a different location and eat not very healthily and not follow a regular schedule and take time off work in order to get it to a stage when I can then go back to my regular early morning practice. But I have another good friend who's a writer, and she says she can only write after 11 o'clock at night. So she does everything else she has to do in a day and then turns to her writing later. So I think it's different for everyone, but you're quite right that it does need to have that discipline and dedication. And for people that haven't made a start yet, I really believe that if you make the time and you make the practice of it, it will come, even if you don't know. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to write about next, for example, but if I've learned anything, and I've barely learned anything, I should say, but what I've learned is if I just sit and carve out the time, something will come of it. The ideas will flow and the pages, the words will get on the page. What about you? When do you find time to write poetry? I'm daunted by poetry, so I'm particularly interested in knowing how you make time for that.
For me, it just a lot of it is instinct, which I know is counterintuitive to writing in a disciplined fashion. But I think for me, when I'm working on the fiction, I have to be more disciplined because it's not poetry. Poetry will come to me on instincts. Even between cases like at 2 a.m. in the morning and I'm done and I can't fall asleep, and then I have an emotion which is sort of wanting to just explode within for whatever reason, a clinical scenario, something in the family, something I've observed in the world, and I'll just I'm actually gonna just write it on my notes app on my iPhone. I mean, that's how I write my short proses for poetry. That's how I compiled my first poetry book. It was all on the notes app of my iPhone, between cases, like in the morning or in the evening when I had put my boys to bed and then I couldn't fall asleep, and I would just write these verses. That is not the same discipline I've followed for the novel that I'm working on. For me, it has been very similar to the schedule that you described, is to put everything to mute. I go to my office, don't have my phone with me. Everyone is engaged in the house, so that I'm by myself. It would be late Friday nights and early Saturday mornings would be dedicated times for writing, where I know that I don't have work on my mind, that I don't have anything else on my mind, and I could just totally focus on what I want to write. And I wish I had the opportunity to just drop everything and go someplace, but I haven't had the opportunity to do that. But maybe that's what's required for me to finish what I'm working on, because it's been quite some time that I've been working on this, and we had to postpone the release this year to next year just because I had not finished the manuscript to my satisfaction, and to the satisfaction of the publisher. So, but that's I think there, and that's why I made the comment that I think when you are committed to writing a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you really have to be disciplined, because motivation will wax and wane. But once you have that dedicated time slotted to, okay, now I have to do this, then it's going to get done.
Yeah, and I think even for me to say that I was able to go away from outside, family responsibilities to do that, that's a huge privilege that I was able to do, and it's not possible for everyone. So I think there's unique ways of trying to carve out that personal time, and it feels quite selfish, but at a certain point I decided I needed to have a bit of selfishness if I wanted to get this project off my back. And because I ended up mentioning this in my acknowledgements, but I dedicated the book in part to healthcare professionals who, really are in the, this is a pun, they are in the DNA of my book, but I was able to write a lot of this book during COVID when I was stuck at home. I wasn't traveling to meetings. I was working unusual hours. I was able to get a draft of this done because I didn't have to be on the front lines. Health professionals and many other workers in society were doing that while I was cozy at home in my pajama pants. So I had that privilege, and I'm not unaware of that for sure.
Yeah. And then, I have to ask you this. Did cardiologists make it into the novel this time or no?
Cardiology makes it into the novel. I'm pretty excited by this, and I'm not going to give anything away, but I do have heart disease there is a character that does develop heart disease in this. And can you imagine if I actually got some detail wrong? I'm never going to hear the end of it. But it was really important to me to have this particular storyline. And it's very minor. It's not a major part of the book. But just writing alone in my little office, I got quite a kick out of the fact that I was able to use some small part of what I have learned over the years in this novel. So yeah, buy my book, cardiologists. Your work is reflected in these pages. So
yeah, that's excellent. So Shelley, I want to ask you this. Which part of writing is the least favorite for you?
At this juncture, I'm just going to say all of it, because it was just such a hard process. But I would say when it's going well, it just is so great and so addictive. But when it's not going well and you just feel like such a fraud and you don't know why you are doing this to yourself, because it's not like I had a book deal. I didn't have a gun to my head. I was doing this because I supposedly wanted to be doing it. And yet I had moved to my in-laws' cabin. I was there on my own. I had nobody cooking me dinner. Seemed quite miserable. So I can't pinpoint a single thing that is the most miserable, except to say that it's really hard and it's quite lonely, and the good times make up for it. But I think there is this pervasive sense, and I get it. I've arrived. I'm a novelist. I've got a publisher. but the imposter syndrome that comes up at any point where you feel like you're doing it wrong, you're not good enough at it, you're not creative enough, all of that is torture. And to that, I'd also say, I'm so grateful that I have this other job that I do that I love. I have friends who are writers and they write full time. And I think how absolutely miserable that must be, because you have nothing else that you're doing in your life. Well, I don't know, probably they do have other things in their life. But for me, I want to know that I'm good at something elsewhere, because then I can take that sense of satisfaction, that sense of accomplishment, that sense that I am doing something meaningful with my life, in order to shore up those moments when I feel, as I say, like such a fraud or so vain. It's so vain that I'm attempting to write a novel. All of those moments of self-doubt. I'm very glad that I have this work that I do in cardiology journalism with great colleagues that are super inspiring. And thank goodness I have that to help me when the other days, the writing mornings are dark and full of self-loathing that is hard to chase away.
Yes, but there has to be something, right? I mean, at least I'm speaking from my own experience. There has to be something which pushes you to put pen to paper. There is a burning desire to share an aspect which you think will change how people think, or will, even if you're not writing to change people, I think it will impact humanity in certain way, shape, or form.
But on the worst days, that feels like total arrogance. Why could I possibly imagine that anybody else wants to read a comma that I have set on paper? So on the dark days, that's how I feel about it. And then in the good moments, when you write a sentence and you just know you've captured something that feels unique and true, then that is the moment where you have the satisfaction. And you desperately hope that you haven't already written that 5 chapters earlier and forgotten about it, or that you read it in somebody else's book. But those rare moments where you feel like you've precisely captured a certain emotion or image, that makes up for those times when you're just sort of drowning in your own vanity over what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, thank you for thank you for sharing that. I think what I was trying to get at was that I think at the end of the day, I mean, even in medicine, when we are trying to quote unquote sell a paper, we are wanting to create. I mean, we're telling a story. Essentially, we want to move the field forward, paper after paper after paper, and in the hope that one day when our colleagues look back, they'll be like, what a story, look where it started and look where we are now. It sort of is a story. So, and I think there's a lot of emotion to it. There is, obviously, for lack of a better word, there are failures, although each failure is a stepping stone in my mind. But then it's this struggle. It's this persistence. It's the excitement of the next step, which makes our journeys and our lives rich and meaningful. And those are the moments that you want to capture as an author and share it with everyone else, because it excites you. So you would hope that it would excite everyone else who reads it.
I think that's why I'm so lucky to have fallen into cardiology journalism or medical journalism more broadly. I mean, had I become a celebrity reporter or something, I think I would not find, I'm so inspired by the type of work that I and my team are writing about. The not every day, but almost every day, or at least once a week, we encounter someone doing something incredible in medicine, and we have the chance to talk to them, to interview them. That is lucky. I feel very grateful for the chance to do that. So for the writing that you're doing on the side, you're doing that alongside very meaningful work. I'm doing it alongside work that I think is meaningful, but it's not as immediately, certainly not clinically relevant. So I'm inspired by the physicians that I get a chance to talk to, and that my team gets to talk to regularly. And hopefully what I'm bringing by writing a novel is something unique to it. I'm a skilled writer. I think I have creativity. So hopefully my skills show up here as well.
Yeah, but I think just to add to what you said there, Shelley, I think the work that you're doing is important because not every clinician or not every cardiologist is going to have the time to parse through the details and the nuances of the topics that you cover for TCTMD.com. And those are, topical topics of relevance and of grave significance to the field. And I think by bringing on experts and interviewing them and parsing through the details and taking the time to put the stories together, you and your team, you sort of are forming. It's not an opinion. I mean, you are. It's almost you. I mean, you are synthesizing evidence. It's not an opinion. It's synthesis of evidence, contemporary evidence, to be consumed by a busy bedside clinician who is busy at the trenches trying to take care of patients. That work has a lot of meaning and power to it.
It does have value. I'm not really trying to shoot it down because I do think it's important, but I also think there's, and we certainly wouldn't be hopefully forming people's opinions, but I do think that we're providing people with a wide range of opinions and perspectives that can help them solidify their own. I would hate to think that we were shaping them in some way, but yeah, I know that it's a shifting field for sure. And I know it does have value for busy clinicians and researchers to be able to have a kind of one-stop shop to find the information they need. I do think this will continue to change. It will continue to evolve. People's needs are different and their ways of consuming information is changing. So it's an exciting field to be a part of, even as I'm sweating away on the fiction writing on the side. I definitely am put through my paces in my day job as well.
So, I was going to ask you, who would you pick as actors for the roles of the protagonists in the novel?
Well, now it's going to be the main character is Kit McKinley, and I am now going to not pronounce her name right, but I often thought about Saoirse Ronan. I know I'm not saying it properly, but she's the Irish American actress. And I think she'd be perfect. But as you know, the book covers 100 years. So it's going to be a little bit like the Queen. There's going to have to be multiple Queen Elizabeth characters that travel through the novel. And hopefully your listeners will write in and tell me how to pronounce her name properly, because I know I'm not doing it justice.
So Shelley, when is this coming out? And how can people pre-order it? And how can people order it when it's out? When is it releasing? Give us that information so that we can share it with our listeners.
Yeah, the book is officially out in the US and Canada August 6th. If you were to just Google the title, The Leap Year Gene of Kit McKinley, or The Leap Year Gene in Canada, you can see that it's available to pre-order anywhere, really, any bookstore. I would say if you have a favorite indie bookstore, please support them. You can, of course, buy this through the big booksellers and Amazon and those types of things as well. But I am a big lover of the independent bookstores. So if you just phone and ask, they either have already ordered it, fingers crossed, or they can bring it in for you. And yeah, pre-orders are interesting. It's something I've learned along the way, but I guess publishers, that gives them a sense of how a book will land if they start to see pre-orders come in before the book is released. So I've been poking all of my family members and friends and trying to convince them to place a pre-order, because I think it looks good up the chain. You don't have to read it either. You just can buy it for your father-in-law or your mother-in-law for Christmas. I just need to get sales up, people.
Yeah, no, I will. So we will share the pre-order link on our show notes for the listenership. Please click on the link, go ahead and buy it. Help Shelley, because she's helped all of us in our clinical practice. And this is like supporting a colleague in cardiology. Shelley, any closing remarks for the podcast for Parallax? And before that, how do you feel about how are you feeling these days about this process of the book is now finished and pre-orders are going in? And I know the energy is anticipatory, which I can understand how that is. So how are you feeling? So that answer that first, and then closing remarks for Parallax. And, thanks again for doing this for us.
Yeah, I'm feeling really emotional about it. I sort of hinted at this earlier, but this was a really long haul for me. I actually finished what I thought was the final draft of this book, I think 3 years ago. And then, as I mentioned, it had quite a struggle to find a home. And now it's actually found a home in 2 countries and quite a good publisher in both places. So I feel emotional. I think this has really been a labor of love that suddenly seemed like it might not come to anything. So the fact that it's almost out there is thrilling. And I'm also kind of nervous because I'm really proud of this book and I really hope people fall in love with it, but that's something I can't control. So emotional and nervous and grateful. Those would be my 3 summary statements.
Very nice. And, I can resonate with how you feel and what you think about, the emotions and the gratitude and the nervousness. I can relate to it for sure. So, thank you for being here and thank you for doing this for us. And I'm excited that, we have you, we've had a chance to record another episode and, talk about your upcoming book. For those of you who are listening, like I said, the details for pre-orders will be in the show notes, and go ahead and order and pre-order, and let's celebrate Shelley's work. Do share your feedback with us. We take feedback seriously, and do rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and SoundCloud. And until other Monday, we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, produced by Radcliffe Cardiology in association with makeadent.org. We aim to bring you a new angle of all things cardiology every second week. Review us on your favourite podcast app or send your comments or questions to podcast@radcliffe-group.com. To view the series, head to radcliffecardiology.com/podcasts/Parallax. Thanks for listening.